Welcome to This Explainer. Today we are diving right into a fascinating look at the Class 5 chapter, The Daily Bread. We're going to explore the amazing sensory journey behind something we eat almost every single day. We'll see how this humble food transforms from just a few simple ingredients into the delicious loaves sitting on your kitchen counter, uncovering some really cool science and history along the way.
But before we get into the science in those massive factory ovens, I want you to just imagine a fresh, warm slice of bread right in front of you. What toppings are you reaching for? Are you team sweet, piling on jam or maybe a rich chocolate spread? Or are you more team savory, going for peanut butter, mayonnaise, or just classic butter? Whatever you prefer, bread is basically the perfect canvas for our meals. So how exactly does it get to our plates?
Well, it all starts with the senses. And that brings us to a wonderful word from the chapter, aroma. An aroma is a pleasant, really noticeable smell. You know, think of it like that invisible, delicious scent cloud of your favorite breakfast that just pulls you right out of bed in the morning. Freshly baked bread has this incredible aroma that can literally make you feel hungry and happy at the exact same time.
Now, the absolute secret to making that bread so soft and fluffy comes down to one word: leavened. This basically means made light, fluffy, or risen, usually by adding something like yeast or baking powder. And get this, yeast is actually a tiny living organism. It acts like millions of microscopic balloons, blowing air, specifically carbon dioxide gas, into the dough to make it rise up. Without leavening, our soft sandwich bread would just be a hard, flat cracker. No thanks.
Let's actually travel back in time for a second to see how baking evolved. For thousands of years, people worldwide just ground up grain and water, making flatbreads that they baked in the hot sun or on scorching rocks. But then came a massive leap forward in ancient Egypt. The Egyptians are credited with making the very first leavened bread and even building the first ovens to bake it in. Fast forward to today, and we have these massive, highly efficient, factory-made loaves that can feed entire cities. It is a pretty incredible journey from hot rocks to high-tech machinery.
Which brings us right to the difference we were just talking about: flatbreads versus leavened breads. A perfect everyday example of a flatbread is an Indian roti. It's cooked on a flat griddle and is completely unleavened. On the flip side, we have soft, airy, leavened breads, like sourdough with its famous tangy flavor, or an Italian focaccia packed with herbs and olive oil. So we have two totally different textures, both incredibly delicious, and it all depends on whether or not we invite our tiny friend yeast to the baking party.
All right, strap in, apprentices, because we're going on a high-speed tour of a modern bread factory. First up is the prep phase. Now, when you're making millions of loaves to feed a whole city, you can't just guess the measurements like you might in your kitchen at home. Every single step has to be perfectly engineered. Let's see how this dough actually comes together.
So, the absolutely crucial point here is the strict precision of these first three steps. Step 1 is scaling. That basically means getting the math right and measuring all the ingredients with total accuracy. Step 2 is mixing and kneading. This combines your sifted flour and water to develop a stretchy, sticky substance called gluten. It's exactly what makes the dough so bouncy. And finally, step 3 is bulk fermentation. This is where a pre-measured amount of yeast is added, and it starts doing its bubbly magic, creating gas that makes the entire huge batch of dough rise up.
Just look at the amazing scale of this operation. These bakers are using massive industrial mixers. And they don't just dump in plain tap water, they use temperature-controlled water. That precise temperature, combined with the heavy mechanical mixing, perfectly stretches out the dough to develop the gluten. That amazing elasticity is what gives bread its beautiful, chewy texture, so it doesn't just crumble apart like dry sand.
Okay, so now the dough is completely prepped, fermented, and super bubbly. But right now, it's just one giant blob. So let's move into the action phase, where the dough finally starts to take shape and actually look like that familiar loaf you'd buy at the grocery store.
Here, automated machinery takes over for the next crucial steps. First up, dividing and shaping. That massive block of dough is cut into individual portions and rounded into shape. Then comes a really vital step called proofing. This is essentially the final fermentation, a last rest in a humidity-controlled environment to let the dough puff up to its absolute perfect volume. Finally, it's baking time. The loaves go right into the oven where the sugars caramelize into a delicious brown crust, followed immediately by cooling.
Let's zoom in on that shaping step for just a second. The baker is rounding the dough, and this isn't just to make it look pretty for the store shelves. Shaping actually stretches the gluten on the outside, forming a really tight, smooth skin. You know, think of it kind of like wrapping a balloon around the dough to trap all those wonderful yeast gases tightly inside.
Plus, it lets the dough relax before it hits the intense heat of the oven.
Skipping ahead to the cooling stage. Once it's baked, the bread absolutely cannot go straight into a plastic bag. First, it has to be scrupulously checked for quality. We're talking its shape, color, aroma, the whole shebang. Then it cools on these racks for at least 2 hours to allow the air to circulate. If they were to bag that bread while it was still hot, the steam would get trapped and the crusts would become completely soggy and ruined. All right, so we've learned how bread is made. But let's slow things down for a moment. Let's step away from the loud machinery of the factory to talk about the actual value of the food we're eating. The chapter shares a really touching story about a young boy named Vichy. Now, Vichy used to regularly throw away half his lunch simply because he didn't like some of the vegetables.
Well, one day, Vichy was walking home and saw something that totally shocked him. An elderly man picking leftover food out of a dustbin because he was just so incredibly hungry. After seeing this, Vichy had a major change of heart. As the text tells us, feeling moved, he actually bought food for the man and promised never to waste his meals again. He suddenly realized how incredibly lucky he was to have a full lunchbox every single day, while others struggled to find even a little bit to eat.
And this brings us to a huge global challenge that the chapter highlights. We waste nearly half of all the food produced for human consumption globally. Literally half. And wasting food doesn't just waste the food itself, it also wastes all the precious water, transport, and resources that were used to grow it. But hey, the good news is you and I can easily change that. We can help out by simply finishing what's on our plates or getting creative with our leftovers instead of just tossing them in the bin. Okay, my master baker trainees, it is time to test your brains. We've covered science, history, complex factory steps, and a really valuable moral lesson. Let's see how much of this amazing chapter you've absorbed with a quick, rapid-fire trivia round. You ready?
Question 1. Do you remember what leavening actually does to the dough? Shout it out if you remember that balloon analogy. Yep, if you guess that leavening makes the bread soft, light, and filled with air by using something like yeast to create gas bubbles, you hit the nail right on the head. Next up, think back to the very beginning of our factory tour. What was that very first super important mathematical step called, where they measure and prepare all the ingredients perfectly before mixing? I'll give you a second. Got it? It's called scaling. You absolutely have to scale the recipe accurately before you can do anything else.
Okay, time for a real science challenge from the text. At what precise temperature does the gluten in the dough coagulate, which basically means to become thick or solid, to set the loaf and form the bread's solid crumb structure? Is it 60, 71, 82, or 100 degrees Celsius? If you paid really close attention earlier, you'll know the magic number is exactly 71 degrees Celsius. Finally, I want to leave you with this to think about. And there are no right or wrong answers here, just reflection. How can you apply Vishasi's lesson about food waste in your own life today? The next time you sit down to eat your favorite bread, whether that's a roti, focaccia, or just a simple peanut butter sandwich, how will you show gratitude for the amazing journey it took to reach your plate and make sure absolutely none of it goes to waste? Thanks so much for joining me on this delicious journey today, and I'll catch you on the next explainer.